In June of 1941, a team of Soviet archaeologists pried open the tomb of the 14th century conqueror Timur. They did this despite local warnings and a very specific inscription carved directly into the stone. The inscription promised a heavy toll. It stated that whoever disturbed the conqueror's rest would unleash an invader far worse than Timur himself. The Soviet team, grounded in strict materialism, dismissed it as ancient superstition. Exactly 3 days later, on June 22nd, Adolf Hitler broke a non-aggression pact and launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. The sudden attack caught the Soviet forces completely unprepared. Hitler deployed over 3 million soldiers and thousands of tanks, initiating a brutal front that eventually cost the lives of millions. When historical events align this perfectly, they create a vacuum in our logic. The human brain struggles to accept that such a massive catastrophe could follow a grave robbery by sheer random chance. To fill that vacuum, we project magical properties onto physical objects. These stories are actually the byproduct of how we process information. Curses emerge from 3 specific human behaviors that transform ordinary accidents into terrifying mythologies. In 1922, Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb ignited a global panic, fueled by a series of high-profile deaths. The media found its proof when the expedition's financier, Lord Carnarvon, died from an infected mosquito bite. On the exact night he passed away, the entire city of Cairo suffered a sudden electrical blackout. This narrative overlooks the man who spent the most time inside the actual tomb. Howard Carter, the person who physically breached the seal and cleared the artifacts, lived another 17 years and died of natural causes. The illnesses suffered by the crew had a highly rational source. After 3,000 years, the sealed chamber was a concentrated incubator. Toxic fungi and ancient bacteria rushed into the respiratory systems of the first people through the door, causing severe lung infections. We see the same pattern with Timur's tomb. Soviet authorities eventually ordered the conqueror reburied with full Islamic rituals. Weeks later, the Soviet army won a massive victory at Stalingrad. People credited the reburial, ignoring the strategic military pushback and brutal winter conditions that actually stopped the German advance. This confusion between biological hazards and supernatural retribution forms the bedrock of the curse myth, where mundane risk is mischaracterized as divine punishment. This process of pattern seeking becomes even more volatile when it leaves the tomb and enters the living room, as it did in 1980s Europe with the Crying Boy painting. The legend claimed that wherever this picture hung, tragedy followed. Reports surfaced of entire homes burning to the foundation, while the painting of the weeping child survived the flames completely untouched. The UK tabloid press seized the narrative. Newspapers ran sensational headlines connecting isolated house fires to the artwork, eventually organizing massive public bonfires where terrified citizens could burn their copies. This graph illustrates exactly how this works. The flat line represents the steady rate of actual house fires in the UK. The sharp spiking line above it shows the explosion in newspaper reports about them. This is confirmation bias, a cognitive shortcut where we only notice information that supports a pre-existing belief. Because the paintings were printed on cheap, fire-retardant board, they naturally survived minor blazes, but readers only started looking for surviving paintings because the press told them to. The media created a self-fulfilling prophecy, manufacturing a curse out of thin air. When the press amplifies random events, it forces a terrified public to perceive a cohesive pattern in tragedies where none actually exists. When farmers in China's Shaanxi province uncovered the Terracotta Army in 1972, they inadvertently exposed the most human driver of these legends, the search for a scapegoat. The government seized their land, and many of the original discoverers died in severe poverty. Facing systemic exploitation from the state is a complex, overwhelming reality. For the local villagers, it was significantly easier to blame their misfortune on the disturbed spirit of an ancient emperor. You find the same coping mechanism in the West, where a tarnished silver urn like the Bassano vase is blamed for sudden deaths, and a harmless Raggedy Ann doll named Annabelle is credited with violent car crashes. When sudden grief or unexpected accidents shatter a family, undocumented claims are whispered from one person to another. Over decades, unverified coincidences mutate into hardened folklore. Ultimately, these stories fulfill a deep psychological need for a physical target, a way to project grief and guilt onto an object when tragedy feels otherwise senseless. We live in an era defined by scientific rigor, yet archaeologists still refuse to open the main tomb chamber of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, and the Annabelle doll remains locked inside a glass box. We do this because humans are deeply uncomfortable with random chaos. Our brains constantly run a process called apophenia, which is a hardwired tendency to string unrelated dots together into meaningful patterns to explain the unexplainable. A curse serves a highly practical function for a frightened mind. It takes the random chaos of disease, fire, and sudden death, and it hits those forces a face, a set of rules, and a narrative structure. The objects sitting in these tombs and glass cases have no inherent power. The only real danger is, and always has been, the incredible power of the stories we choose to believe.